So 5 things about verbal cues is interviewing tip number 64. Welcome back to 101 Tips for Interviewing and Interrogation. This is tip number 64. This time we're going to talk about the 5 things about verbal behaviors. We just finished talking about in the last visit, number 63, 5 things about body language cues. So I want to focus on 5 things, not an inclusive list of every possible cues to look at verbally, but a quick 5 things that I want you to remember. First of all, number 1, there's a lot of myths about verbal cues, quite a few myths that wind up causing us to misdiagnose subjects about deception. For example, one of the things that said if a person is a lot of ums and uhs, so forth, that is a sign of deception. Unfortunately, that doesn't hold up in empirical research. In fact, our data found that in research we did in New York, that ums and uhs lean toward or pointed more often toward an innocent person, probably having emotional difficulty explaining what was going on, or emotionally dealing with the incident that they were either witnessed or part of, or a victim of, and now having trouble in explaining or describing that particular problem. We've heard that stammering and stuttering could be a sign of deception. Again, that doesn't hold up. There's more stress in the performance of the message, and so it's the background noise of stress, again, for lack of a delicate term, it's a performance anxiety in describing, explaining what happened. Stalling tactics, again, for example, are not deception cues, but they may have some very good incriminating potential. It tells you that this particular topic area, that the question you've asked is a good one. Okay, you're on track. You've energized or raised the level of cognitive load in your subject, causing them extra time, extra energy in thinking. Could be deception, but again, it could be just stress that tells you that that's an important area that you need to spend some time on. So be worth your effort to follow up and talk about that topic area. Okay? So stalling's not, our ums and uhs are not, yawning is not deception. It's a background stress behavior, unless they're obviously faking it or staging it, which we call a performance cue when we talked about our 5 things in body language. Okay, second thing about the 5 things, verbal cues are quite rare. People don't generate as many of them. And if we don't generate as many cues at all in verbal signals, because we're very diligent, we're very circumspect, we're very focused on censoring our speech. That's right. Now think of it as verbal cue versus body language cue. Which one are you most likely to get a lot more trouble in? Something that you say. We've learned, and B.F. Skinner talked about this a long time back in the 30s in his research called verbal behavior, that as we learn as children to master our speech, we learn very quickly to say something precisely, something clearly, something that's easily understood, you get immediate results. You get positive feedback. But say something that is unclear or unacceptable or uncomfortable or harmful, and it causes immediate dissatisfaction. Okay? Conditioned response is what it amounts to. So we work very, very hard at censoring our speech. We don't censor our speech the way we do our body language. So for that reason, there's very, very, very few cues that people will present because we know to monitor what we're saying. The trade-off is because there's few, but you get a lot of body language cues, but there's a lot of noise, a lot of non-deception cues in body language that nothing more than communication of emotions and emblems and so forth. Okay? Fourth thing I want you to remember about verbal cues is because we're censoring so much, third thing, because we're censoring so much, think about this. Who here is the first person who hears what we say when we speak? Think, who hears what you say first before we ever speak it? Well, of course, we do. Why? Think about this. Because first you think it, then you say it. So there's a process going on with verbal cues that adds an extra step that isn't present in body language. So we talked about timing of body languages versus speech. Body language tends to occur a half a beat ahead before the voice does, because there's an extra step of censorship that's going on. So if there's not rarely very any accidents in speech. You don't have those many accidents. This is the fourth tip, because if you said it, it's because you thought it. Because you evaluated and put together the impact that you wanted. Now, you hear people say they misspoke. You know what my definition of misspoke is? I said what I was really thinking, and I wish I could take it back. Because there wasn't an accident. We just failed to properly censor ourselves, which is of a great advantage to the interviewer. Because failure to censor is a result a lot of times of cognitive load, and we hear of the real true thoughts the person has been filtering the whole time. Now, a final piece about verbal cues, when you compare assessing deception using verbal cues versus body language cues, people who put a little more emphasis on the verbal cues tend to be far more accurate in spotting deception. It's also less work intensive, less labor intensive. And going back to our research that I was involved in New York, I think I told you last time that for every hour of tape, or excuse me, every 2 minutes of tape, it took an hour to diagnose all the behaviors. Of that time, it only took 15 minutes to diagnose the speech cues, where it took 45 minutes for the body language. So it took more work, and there was no body language cues. The worst, or the very best body language cue is never as good as the worst verbal cue. But again, there's few of them. So your subjects will use their verbal cues. That's where they're going to try to establish where they manipulate you, or where they mislead you, or disform the truth on you. So that is their tool in affecting deception. Now remember, for deception to work, I've got to convince the person, the listener, to buy into my story, to buy into my explanation, to suspend belief in their conclusions, to suspend belief in what the forensics and other witnesses or the victims have told them. Ignore all of them. I'm the only one that is right. So that's where the tool is, but it's only good if you as the interviewer really put pressure on the target points. So listening to the verbal cue in a narrative, you see the spikes, the big changes, where there's incriminating potential. You follow up on that area and you do a tighter Google search, more specific in that topic area. That's when you raise the cognitive load. That's when you catch the deception cues. So when you compare voice and body together, both are of value, but for different reasons, and there's different return on your effort. Greater return on focus on verbal cues, lesser return on body language, more emotional diagnosis of body language cues, not as much as the verbal cues. So take a look and compare those two. Go back and look at, again, some of our online courses that share this information with you. Find out in the Pocket Guide. Again, you're welcome to give me a call or drop an email if you'd like to set up training for your agency. I'm scheduling now, doing lots of folks for in-service and doing very customized programs just for their specific type of particular discipline or profession. So until we see you next time for tip number 65, this is Stan Walters. Be safe.